Western liberals have been taught for decades now that all oppressions intersect and overlap and are related to each other. And this is a situation where, in my opinion, Western liberals being raised and taught in schools their whole lives about how we live in the US and Canada specifically, about how we live on stolen lands, we're colonizers, we're oppressors, all of the crimes that we committed against the indigenous populations. What I believe is that Western liberals see themselves in this conflict as being in the position of being able, as they feel, being able to stop or prevent a modern day colonization. Hello everyone, welcome to the Critical Compass. Today's episode we are talking about Queers for Palestine, the rallying cry of various groups protesting for the last couple weeks in the wake of the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel and Israel's military response to that. My name is Mike and this is James. James, let's start with talking a little bit about kind of the nature of the Palestinian and Israel conflict as we know it.
Yeah, I guess we've kind of got a difficult situation because you've got wildly different perspectives in two groups of people. You've got like a land-based disagreement. So one group saying that we deserve this land and another group saying we deserve this land. You have a history together as well as you have differences in religious beliefs and claims to that spot as well. And when you mix all this together, you got a difficult situation where it's hard to find any compromise when people think they have the divine right to a place. So that creates issues already. I guess it is difficult to get a sense of what every citizen is thinking and saying. We can only, when we're doing our own research and we're trying to get a sense of people's ideas, we do have a sample bias, but it is worth looking at like what laws exist in a place, what do their religious texts have, also if a mass protest, if there's any messaging that is common and repeated and pretty much is sanctioned by a mass protest, that's usually, you could sum that up as them being one of their beliefs. You do get into a tricky place where I don't know if everybody thinks they're subscribing to the same ideas. So from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. I hear some people saying that that means zero Jews in the whole area from the river to the sea. Like the only way that it can exist peacefully is if nobody's living there who is Jewish.
Right.
Other people just say, well, that's more metaphorical, and maybe they're supporting that, chanting that, and maybe not thinking about it in the same way. So you may get some disagreements on what some of these messages actually mean. And you get people actually living there, but then you have this Western dynamic of people supporting from the West with kind of a limited perspective here. And that's maybe something we'll touch on, is when you get activism from the West being filtered through these identity politics. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, and part of what it looks like, as it turns out, it seems, is that to be a Western liberal or a leftist, that means that you must support Palestine, and apparently, if you support Israel, that means you're a right winger, far right, or otherwise a conservative. What do you think are some of the reasons for that? And I'll have my opinion in there after.
So I think when it comes to social justice, they're very much focused on an oppressed and oppressor lens. And no matter where you, or like intersectionality is basically this idea that everybody is oppressed and the oppressor because you may be oppressed on multiple categories. And if that is a core belief, it is not surprising for people to look at Palestine and maybe look at some of the land disagreements or the territorial shifts as acts of oppression. And there may be some legitimacy. It's over the history of like maybe some negotiations on land were done more, like more fairly than others. So there is always a kernel of truth in that. But that's how you get this oppressor lens applied to this situation.
With Israel being viewed as the oppressor and Palestinians being viewed as the oppressed.
Yes, one thing to add is if you do talk to some people from Israel, they are viewing themselves as oppressed as well and being oppressed by Palestine and or just the religious texts
and the surrounding demise. Well, that's for sure. And who talked about that this last week? About that was the Eric Weinstein and Sam Harris debate where Eric talked about how there are certain elements of the Jewish and Christian texts that put a natural sort of I don't know the term, but sort of a limiting factor on the religion that Islam doesn't have when it comes to conquest, military might, and the ultimate goal of the religion. I'm very much simplifying it, but I think that's maybe what you're referring to.
Yeah, and if I think if you look at the pure numbers, the ratio of like Muslims to Jewish people in that area, very much there. Is it 1 billion to? Is it even a couple million right now?
Yeah, I think it might be 8 to 12 million or in that kind of range. I think.
Yeah, sub 100 for sure.
Oh,
and yeah. Like so, they have a fraction of the number of people. So, in their eyes, they very much feel very much alone in a sea of people who don't like them.
Yeah, yeah. Just by the numbers. I mean, just by the numbers, the landmass, the area. That's pretty hard to argue against.
So it was just interesting to see them also take the perspective of being oppressed in this situation. So we have a situation where both groups think they're being oppressed by the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you come to terms with that in discussions?
Well, and so that leads me nicely into what my little pet theory on this is that and Douglas Murray talked about this as well in a video clip that we're going to show. But he talks about how Western liberals have been taught for decades now that all oppressions intersect and overlap and are related to each other. And this is a situation where, in my opinion, Western liberals being raised and taught in schools their whole lives about how we live in the U.S. and Canada specifically, about how we live on stolen lands, we're colonizers, we're oppressors, all of the crimes that we committed against the indigenous populations. What I believe is that Western liberals see themselves in this conflict as being in the position of being able, as they feel, being able to stop or prevent a modern day colonization. And in some way, this would atone for the self-hate and the guilt that they feel for how they were raised to view themselves in the Western world. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, it's they can't stop colonization at home, so they're looking to other places to where this is maybe in their eyes the biggest current example of this happening.
Yeah, it's happening in real time. Their perceived atonement for the sins of their fathers, right?
Yeah, and I guess that touches on also the driving motivation of some of these activists is this idea of quick salvation from sins. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, you are born with original sin since if everybody's oppressed and oppressor, it doesn't take long before you are blamed of being an oppressor to somebody else. So nobody is free of sin in this way of thinking. So that's where you have to find ways of atoning.
Yeah, and do you think that there's also, I hadn't thought about this till just now, but do you think there's also sort of a view amongst Western liberals of the less educated type, we'll say, that view Jews as white or as synonymous with white people, despite what the demographic makeup of the area might actually reflect?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at even like university admissions, or I don't know how they start filtering down, but I know like the category of white or white adjacent or whiteness has been expanded. So you even find Asians in Western universities are
it's
now
Harvard you're referring to, right?
They are, yeah, they are overperforming. Therefore, they're being treated as white in the same kind of, when they're rebalancing admissions to try to increase numbers of underrepresented groups. So
was it Harvard or Yale that basically straight up said that they would not be following the recent Supreme Court judgment about that?
I'm not sure.
It was one of them. We'll put it in the description. But one of the major Ivy Leagues said that.
You got to give them credit for being consistent to their values.
They stick to their beliefs. Yeah, God bless them. Okay, what's next, James? Let's have a quick segue into what has seemingly happened to media coverage of the Ukraine, because ostensibly the war in Ukraine is still happening. I wouldn't know. I haven't heard anything about it for a month, just about.
Yeah, basically, at all hands on decks, all eyes. That was dominating pretty much any sphere that you may go in. If you're in the Twitter X space, Ukraine was still being pushed on a daily basis. And then your mainstream media outlets very much hyper-focused on that. And it seems to have pivoted. And is that any less important? You think that would be balanced out, but you almost have these cases where it almost just en masse, you get just excitement, this buzz over a certain topic, and
something new.
Yeah, something new. It's the, like, look here. It's almost like we have a squirrel situation where the attention's just thrown somewhere else all of a sudden. And I don't know if anything's going to still, like, what amount of coverage will happen in Ukraine. Like, I haven't been seeing very much.
Yeah, I don't really know what the situation is currently. I mean, I get it to a certain extent where, you know, a massive terrorist attack happens, and of course that's going to dominate the 24-hour cycles, but it's been about a month now, and it doesn't feel like, it feels to me, and I don't mean this to come off as conspiratorial, but it feels to me anyway that there was precious little goodwill left regarding the media coverage of Ukraine Palestine, or sorry, Jesus, Ukraine Russia. But now with the Palestinian conflict, that is much more polarizing, and there's not a lot of consensus for or against it at this time, which maybe that drives more clicks. I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit more of a hot button issue that they can capitalize on purely from an engagement perspective.
Yeah, it's always worth kind of looking at some of these things. Sometimes you have coverage that is, the amount of coverage is linked more directly to somebody's bottom end, let it be driving engagement, kind of tailoring to the viewers. So you do get this case on both sides of the aisle. You will get people feeding content to their echo chamber because their viewers either expect content on that or it resonates with their viewership, their pre-existing viewership. One thing I did notice is, so the last time we spoke, and we can link to this in the show notes, but we were talking about some of the parental rights protests here in Canada, the Million March for Kids, which kind of had a strange demographic where normally on the left, you think the left is a bastion for all these the underrepresented groups, these minorities, the people of color, and the parental rights protest geared around gender ideology and what should be taught in school and how much it should be withheld from parents, as well as can like a kid socially transition and change their name without the parents knowing about it, without the parents' consent. And you saw firsthand, a lot of the people there were they were Muslim. There were basically a wide cross section of Canada representing these protests who were pushed back against the left. And it's strange now to see the left almost like these woke activists trying to tag along with people that they were at odds with before. Mm. And now that it's a different issue, it's almost like they just forgot about the fact that their beliefs don't align with the ideology that they're pushing, which makes kind of this whole gays for Gaza or queers for Palestine, these movements, very strange because they are advocating for something for people that do not support their views.
Yeah, they do come across as sort of strange bedfellows, don't they? And it is I don't know what to call it, if it's sweet in a way that they've put aside their differences from just a couple months ago and are now all uniting against Israel and the Zionists, or if it's more just an indication of the hypocrisy of the movement in general. Because at the Million March for Kids, I would say that it was highly representative demographically. There were people of all shapes and sizes, colors and creeds, but there was definitely a strong showing of Arab and what can only be assumed as Muslim support, and understandably so, because the Muslim faith is particularly, I don't know if I would say unique, but it's particularly strong still in the modern era on parental rights and family structure and nuclear families and all that sort of thing. So it makes sense that they would be the ones particularly in support of such a movement. Whereas what you found on the counter-protester side, the more stereotypically leftist side, the rainbow flags side, is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly young, college, university aged, not a lot of what you would assume would be people who had young families who would be affected by these issues. So that was an interesting thing to observe. And then now, when the Israel Palestine conflict really popped off just a month ago, it is very strange and interesting to note that now all is forgotten. They're back on the side of the same Arab people that they were so vehemently opposed to not a month before. I don't know what it means. I don't know if it's a nuance that they're maybe not aware that they're showing, or if it's hypocrisy or what it is, but it's noteworthy. How about that?
Yeah, and
it's remarkable.
You can find a same parallel. One way to look at this conflict is I'm always wary if a side says you cannot talk about this, or any side start trying to shut down discussion or quickly labeling people. So it doesn't matter where it's coming from. If somebody says, if you don't believe this, then you are this label, or vice versa. I'm always wary of that. And it seems like the Antifa crowd is very much the ones fighting Nazis at other rallies are very comfortable at rallies where some very anti-Semitic statements can be shouted out loud without distancing themselves from these statements.
Yeah, that's interesting how the people who are so quick to call others the big modern N words are seemingly they're sounding closer and closer to the people they're condemning, and it's maybe we'll also leave a link to horseshoe theory in the show notes, because that's what it feels like to me. I think, James, you have a video queued up that demonstrates something like that.
Well, yeah, let's take a look at. So we've got a good channel. We're going to link to this below, is Common Ground Conversations. Fantastic individual, basically going in the streets and having conversations with people and trying to get a sense of what their thoughts are, and really just a genuinely curious individual. This video
is the guy that Peter Boghossian interviewed in Melbourne, right?
I believe so, yeah. Very much almost a similar curiosity to like what people believe and why. So in this video, he goes over his ideas and his take on the conflict, breaks down his ideas, and very much advocates for somebody to do their own thinking. He has a conversation with a Jew, and then he also has conversations with the Palestinian. But the funny thing is, he gets attacked by these professional protesters, or these people who seem to show up at any protest and have these same destructive tactics that we see Antifa. Regardless if they call themselves Antifa, they have the same tactics of disruption, noise making, physical disruptions, and or just general preventing discussions from happening. And let's play just a little bit of the professional protesters here.
Free Palestine!
Common Ground.
The Insta.
Yeah.
What's it called again?
Common Ground Conversation.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
What's your name, bro?
My name's Yaz.
Yaz, Rich.
Nice to meet you, bro.
Nice to meet you. Once you're here for long enough, this becomes home.
Yeah, well, that's what it is.
The
Yeah.
right person to consider Melbourne home. I mean, that's very racist.
Hey, no, boys, because I don't know, he just wants to have a
He's familiar with our YouTube channel.
I kind of like keep up with what they're doing.
Yeah, no, he's just going to use it for far right content. He's just going to use it for far right content.
No, I mean, look, I've sort of kept up with a lot of the things that he said. I don't know if I would sort of position him as far right. Bro, we're just going to get followed, or what?
Yeah, maybe.
Is that like a typical kind of...
I sat down.
But I went up, bro, hey, I think that you guys don't... I went up to him, but I saw him having the mic and I went up to him.
Alright, you're welcome to do that. We're just letting you know what's
So,
This is the vibe.
Yaz. Body count. People who aren't from... Yeah.
Free Palestine!
Bro, we understand free Palestine, but...
Get out of here!
Alright, we're just going to jump on this side over here. Take it over here.
Go over here. Go right over here.
See that dome? Go all the way over there. Go to the dome.
No, bro, look, here's the thing, yeah? This is where I'm starting to have an issue. Because you're a white guy, I'm here for a Palestinian issue. I came here as a refugee, and now you guys are treating me as if...
So very much the same kind of tactics you see in any protest in any Western country.
Yeah.
So that led to his arrest, actually. So, which,
well, of course, that's
yeah, like
he should have known for asking questions where he shouldn't have been.
So that was actually, I believe that was a clip after his arrest as well. But as he went back,
I was curious about the part though, James, in this video where he showed clips. I don't know if you know where it is in this video, or we'll just have to link to it, where he showed clips of that rally where people were chanting "Gas the Jews, kill the Jews."
Why can't we make peace with? Why can't the Israeli government make peace with Hamas?
Good question. Because Hamas are savages and they have no interest in peace. Their only interest is in destruction, rape, pillage, murder. That is what their interest is. In their charter, it calls for the destruction of Israel. And if you notice here in Melbourne, you had a lot of people that were supporting Hamas and they were chanting, "Gas the Jews, F the Jews."
Not a good look, I suppose.
I haven't seen much of people like really making distinctions. They'll just say Free Palestine.
Yeah.
Like, well, what does that mean? Like, do you subscribe to all the ideas? Like,
Yeah, what does a Free Palestine look like?
yeah. And how would they achieve a Free Palestine?
That's right.
After they
That's
define
right.
what
does
it
the
looks
process
like.
look?
Yeah. Does that include violence? So if you have,
Well, it's interesting here too. If we take it back to even a further protest, we don't have anything here for this, but just to reference, if you remember, I know you remember, if our audience remembers, from the Freedom Convoy in February of 2020. I think this was maybe from even late January, the first or the second day, and there was a what many people believe to be a plant of some type, because he wasn't seen. He didn't show his face. He wasn't there before and after. But that one person who was holding the F Trudeau flag along with the Nazi flag.
was that the Nazi flag that showed up at the chateau that only had access if you went inside the building? It was on some of the stairs. Something like it wasn't even in the mass. Wasn't even the mass of people. Like
yeah, it wasn't. And there was a guy who I believe was trying to fly. I don't know if he was trying to fly another one or if it was like a Confederate flag or something like that, but he was very quickly shooed away from the rest of the protesters too. No one wanted anything to do with him. But regardless, after that happened, the narrative from every single media source after that became the Freedom Convoy is a home for Nazi sympathizers and supporters with no context surrounding it. So in this situation where you have video evidence of Free Palestine rallies that are chanting "Gas the Jews" and "Kill the Jews," like, and I haven't heard a peep from it on any media source other than these people who you're about to show are being arrested for asking questions at the rallies. Seems silly to me.
Yeah, you don't have the same rule set. Media's not using the same rule set when applied to different groups.
They're not curious at all about it.
Yeah, you think they would be talking more about like, well, when is it okay to demonize an entire group?
Yeah.
Like, usually that's not a good idea to paint every member of a group the same and or call for violence towards members. I thought that was a pretty clear-cut rule, but apparently it's not talked about now. So
no, it's subjective apparently.
Well, let's see how this guy got arrested. Just throw this back up, and he shows a little bit of the harassment before that as well, and then
this is just a great video. Everyone should watch this when we're done.
Ladies and gents, welcome to another episode of Common Ground Conversations, where we ask the important but controversial questions.
How are you?
Hey!
Long time no see.
Hey! We got the whole boy squad.
Is that hype? Is that hype?
Guys, what's going on? Guys, need to leave. You need to leave. Thanks, mate.
This way, mate. Let's go off the side first, please.
Come out to the side.
Yeah, what's going on? Why are you taking me and not them?
Well, they just had reports you're agitating the crowd a bit, alright? So
I was agitating. Are you serious?
Yeah, very serious, mate.
So just,
In the corner.
Just here.
Sir, around here. You're being told, for breach of the peace, you are not to go in that crowd anymore.
How am I breaching
You are
the peace?
disrupting that crowd.
How
so
was
you're not
I
going any
disrupting
further.
that? How
We're
was
getting
I,
your details.
How was I disrupting? Yeah, you get my details. How was I disrupting that crowd?
State your full name and address.
How was I
sir.
disrupting that crowd?
Give us your full name and details.
How was I disrupting that crowd?
Full name and details, sir, or
How
you
about
can be
your
arrested.
full name and details?
My full name, 345.
Oh yeah. How about your actual name?
No.
These people deserve to be able to share
That's
their
fine.
perspective. And I haven't aggressed anyone. These gents were following me, and you've taken me out of the crowd.
You've been taken out of the crowd, yes.
Why? Because
My
you said I was
supervisor has told you
breaching
to
the
take you
peace.
out of the crowd.
Why?
Because you're inciting the crowd.
Because
okay?
I'm what?
Because you're inciting the crowd.
What do you mean? That doesn't even make any sense. Inciting.
Disrupting the
Inciting
crowd.
what?
So therefore,
What
you're
am I
breaching the
inciting?
peace. So state your full. Sir, all right, 4 other
What are
are
you
going to be
doing,
arrested.
man? Arrested for what?
For failing to state your full name and address.
Richard Jackson.
Don't resist. Don't resist. Don't resist. Don't resist.
We've said
What are you doing?
you've committed an offence. Just comply.
What?
Don't resist.
Hey, get it on camera. Get it on
That's
camera.
fine. We've
Get
got
it
a
on
camera
camera.
too.
Yeah. Richard Jackson.
Richard Jackson, what's your video?
Thanks, man. Thanks.
We're going to confirm your details.
What am I being arrested for?
Well,
What am I being arrested for? What am I being arrested for?
The direction to move on, and that'll be it.
You boys should be ashamed. All of you should be ashamed. You guys too for going along with it.
What did you do wrong?
I did nothing wrong.
Just want to know so we don't do the same thing, you know?
Ask questions. You can't ask questions. You should be ashamed.
What's your date of birth?
Your enforcement of the law.
Is that cop going through his
What is inciting me?
Inciting means that you're encouraging the crowd to be violent.
So you're telling me I was
I'm
encouraged?
telling you what I got told. Okay.
From
So,
who? From who?
From my commander.
And
okay?
was
my
there any
commander
evidence
tells-
whatsoever?
I can find that evidence later.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
My
Good luck.
commander tells
Good luck.
me that you are disrupting the crowd.
34549. You should
That
be
I can arrest
absolutely
you.
ashamed.
Okay.
Am I free to go,
Yes,
gentlemen?
as long as you don't continue to incite the crowd.
Am I allowed to ask questions? Is that all right with
can
you?
ask questions, but don't incite the
yeah.
crowd.
I wouldn't incite. I never incited the crowd. You have a look at your reports. Why did you become a police officer?
It's none of your business, man.
So
Infuriating.
can't ask questions. You can't like I imagine what happened there is somebody called it in and they pointed to a person with a camera and they followed up on that complaint.
Yeah.
But they didn't vet.
assess the veracity of the complaint. I don't know if you could hear me over it on your end. What I couldn't really hear the audio that well, but was the cop going through the YouTuber's phone? Is that what he was doing?
They may have watched the footage
from his own phone.
Yeah, so I think there was a little bit of time lapse where I imagine he said like, well, I have proof I was not harassing them.
Right.
Watch the proof, and he kind of skipped ahead in that situation,
Right.
and
That would
that's
make
why he
sense,
got
yeah.
set free because
I suppose
they were wanting to arrest him for that, and they're like, well,
because I know in a lot of places in the world, like you just don't have phone privacy rights like you do in other countries. So yeah, that I was just like I was going to be righteously indignant on his behalf if that was the case, but that would be a good use of it actually if you could prove in fact that you were not inciting anyone, which of course he wasn't. But the notion that all it takes is a hysterical, what I assume would be a hysterical call from a protester saying someone is inciting us here by filming us asking hard questions.
Yeah, it's worth covering more of the video because he does show he knows some of these protesters. He's seen them before, and they have also been destructive.
Like they seek him out.
Yeah, I am pretty sure they are taking it like a mission to protect this protest against these hateful bigots who dare go there with a camera to ask questions.
Yeah. That's but it's from the playbook. Again, from the last episode, we can reference the
Beautiful
the website,
Trouble.
Beautiful Trouble. Yeah, right. Okay, well, great video. Infuriating, but very good. We'll sort of I suppose pivot at this point to the title of our podcast today about Queers for Palestine. What do you think? I know we've touched on it a little bit, but what do you think is what do you think possesses a Western self-described queer person to support Palestine and not be the least bit curious about what their own personal social standing might be in the country that they are supporting.
I imagine there's a little bit of kind of this just going along with the group. So if you have these kind of party lines of like left's supposed to support Palestine and right's the one supporting Israel, and they see it through this larger lens, then I think they can't shake those fundamental principles that we mentioned before of oppressed versus oppressor. Everything fits into that box. So I think they're looking at it from a ground level, and it's almost a tunnel vision based on those principles. And I imagine that they can't unsee that because they see that in everywhere. And I think they're just stuck in that idea.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think that's probably it. I don't know that I've seen any good really one-on-one interviewing with a Queers for Palestine protester, but yeah, I would be really curious to know if they know what the most of the Arab world does to queer people.
I think there was might be a Billboard Chris. Might only be on Twitter. Maybe we link to it after, but he did. So he's very much at the forefront of. Yeah, we'll add that in. And then there's also. Maybe we'll add this to the show notes as well. There's a James Klug video where he pretends to be doing a petition for to support Palestine, and then he's like, "Oh, by supporting this petition, you're also," and he lists of all the things they're agreeing to, and like the mistreatment of women and or gay people and or so. He has this list. I'm like, oh, this is why, or this, you have to also support these things to support Palestine. In that case, and people all of a sudden were a little less enthusiastic to sign this petition.
Yeah.
So maybe that was just a way of maybe him getting his foot in the door of thinking about these. Well, like, how do you get people starting to think about things maybe they didn't actually consider? And that's one of the things. Is a group of people supporting another group of people who don't support them.
It's good. It's effective. It's probably something that people are in a bit of a. We're in a bit of a bubble here in the West where we sort of, I suppose, have an implicit assumption that people are the same generally, no matter where you go in the world, and everyone is treated the same, and everyone believes similar things. But I think that a lot of people would be surprised at the actual breadth of human opinions when it comes to alternative lifestyles or other things that we sort of take for granted in the West because we don't. This sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If you raise a generation believing that their oppression is inherent to their life and only by assembling and organizing and overthrowing can they ever be truly free. I think you just have this assumption that everywhere else in the world is like that as well and believes the same thing, is being taught the same thing, when really it's only here that happens, and it's only here that we what I believe start everyone behind an 8-ball believing, having such negative I'm sort of rambling now, but having such a negative view of themselves. The rest of the world doesn't do that. They aren't as introspective as we are about these issues, and they take very different things for granted there than we do here.
Yeah, and one thing worth noting is some of the distinctions, and like you've got Palestine, and then you have Hamas, which is the elected government of the Gaza Strip, if I have that correct.
I believe so, yeah.
Has a certain amount of support from the people there. So just because there are some laws there does not mean the laws exist in a vacuum. They are somewhat representative of the people who live there.
That's right.
So maybe I guess with the gays for Gaza or the queers for Palestine, it's worth noting a couple of things of like, well, queerness as a political identity, it's a rejection of heteronormativity and the default assumption that people are kind of designed by nature to be heterosexual, regardless of you look at any other mammalian species that fall predominantly into heterosexual kind of mating patterns, mostly because that's the best strategy of reproducing. Any other strategy is a little less effective, and if animals take up those strategies, they don't last as long as a species. So queerness challenges this idea of that being the default, which it's different than just homosexuality or gayness being just same-sex attracted. Queerness is it's a statement on the normative nature of the world. So in this case, I believe they are protesting mostly to try to further that, further liberate people from the heteronormative pressures in that area. The only problem is that area does not, they don't want, like, they don't have the same sentiment. They don't want.
That is not something from which they desire to be liberated.
Yeah. So maybe let me show you a great little resource. So we've got a LGBT equality index, and it
James,
ranks.
why does this equality index specifically hate plus people and 2S people?
We're missing a lot of letters on this index.
Some A's and some I's that are missing.
I guess that begs the question of how often do you have to update your acronyms to be current with this? So on here, you've got legal rights and kind of public perception, which is how friendly they are. They have the TQ plus down there. They don't have the TQ up there, but that's beside the point. So let's look at some of the top regions: Iceland, Denmark, Norway. Canada's fifth. Doing pretty good here. All the countries
Uruguay's very high. Holy.
Yeah, maybe that's worth exploring further. Maybe they
South
just
American countries.
Yeah, it's if they have certain public support and enough laws protections. I guess these are the metrics. Have you seen Palestine? Palestine. Where's Israel? Is somewhere. Let's find Israel. Let's do a quick little search. 45.
Okay. Above Thailand and below Suriname. All right.
And we'll do a quick search for 190th is Palestine.
Okay.
So maybe some work to be done.
Just above Qatar. That's something. That's I don't know if you remember Qatar from the previous World Cup last year.
All the companies that were friendly to LGBTQ community supported soccer in a place that isn't as supportive. So I guess no screening for that. So yeah, basically,
thank God there are no gay soccer players. We know that for a fact because they wouldn't have been able to play. So.
So if you look at the rights in Palestine, gay marriage is unrecognized. Really don't have any legal protections for housing or discrimination. Donated blood still banned. It's
conversion therapy not banned.
Yeah, so these are all things that, like, these kind of issues, other countries have had these for many, many years, and they're maybe a little bit behind. I believe some of the public opinion, some of these polls come from a wider area, but it may still reflect some of the sentiment in the people there. But perceptions of it being a good place for gay and lesbian people, like, I wonder how much that has changed over the years, but I imagine if that was 2013, that's only 10 years ago. So that's not even one generation. So
no,
I don't imagine that's changed a whole lot. And then, yeah, like, not a lot of protections, and legally,
it's generally
this
not a place you want to be if you're a queer person. We'll say that. Yeah. Okay.
So, well, why are people supporting a place that isn't supporting them? Are they advocating for the increase of rights, or is the discussion not about that? Like, have we heard any mentions about that? Like, why aren't they kind of holding up Israel as a example of better treatment of gay people? Or what about, there's no applauding the fact that many Palestinians go to Israel for abortions?
Right.
These things these are huge issues on the left, and there's no spotlight on this as people go to their sides.
That's right. Well, I'll contribute something, James, to this podcast, and I have a video queued up of perhaps I don't know, can we say maybe the most I don't want to say notorious, maybe the most outspoken, maybe the most well known of the modern day gay conservatives in Mr. Douglas Murray. Yeah. And let's take this quick clip here. I'm not going to play all of it, but we'll just start from the top for Douglas Murray on the Modern Wisdom podcast.
Of them. There's something haunting about this, I find, because it's especially haunting because it sort of demonstrates that your slogans and your attitudes only go so far, and they can't keep out some of the things that are lurking at the edges. And I think that when I hear people whining about minor things, if you have any idea of the world out there, if you had any idea of the things that was lurking, you couldn't possibly be complaining about this.
Well, how do you think Gays for Gaza will get on long term?
Well, the joke at the moment is that there aren't enough tall buildings in Gaza to throw Gays for Gaza off. But these people are, I've said very often, they're part of the same phenomenon as turkeys for Christmas and chickens for KFC. I mean, I'm fed up with these fringe idiot cases. I mean, they're so mentally defective, these people, and incredibly narcissistic. I can be queer and also celebrate Palestine. No, you fucking can't. Fuck off. Just, I can both argue for a two-state solution and also celebrate queerness and also not let myself down. No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't do all those things. At some point, you've got to choose.
At this point, Douglas is pretty frustrated, especially the fact that he's kind of been excommunicated by the community. Despite being gay, he's also a white male, which kind of offsets any privilege he gains being a gay man.
I think it cancels itself out, I believe, yeah. Yeah, and the fact that he's a white conservative gay, actually he has no oppression protection at all, I don't believe. We're joking about this, but I think it's actually true. Like I don't think that unless you're I probably can only think of like Dave Rubin off the top of my head and other prominent like gay conservatives. I feel silly for not knowing more. He's not a conservative, but Glenn Greenwald is often lumped in with conservatives. Another person who spent most of his career apolitical, like not apolitical, but not being associated one way or another with any given wing, just reporting on news, whoever happens to do it, being known as an anti-war reporter more than anything else. But if you criticize the wrong side for the same things, you get lumped in with the opposite side. So, I mean, it's sort of we're going beyond our show notes here, James, but this is an interesting phenomenon that we're seeing where it sort of relates to for being a queer for Palestine, where it doesn't particularly matter what the nuance of your views or the nuance of your demographic is. If you believe the wrong thing in the moment, you're done.
Yeah, and what ends up happening is you've got certain shows that are a little bit left-leaning, or media that is left-leaning, and when you have an opinion that does not fit with kind of their idea of acceptable discourse, what they do is they stop inviting certain commenters to things. And these may be left-leaning commenters. And then when you have other media outlets on the right, or you have podcasts, or you have people wanting to have conversations, and we'll have conversations with anybody, doesn't matter what side of this political discourse you're on, what ends up happening is these alt-right podcasts, these alt-right media will invite these people to have conversations, and just because they're curious. And now the left-wing media will look at that and say, well, we can't invite this person back because they are now on these right-wing shows, and therefore they are a right-winger. And that's how they do it, is they just push people out. And just by not, you can see, you'd be curious, maybe we do an episode and we show the cases of people who have been slowly excommunicated from, who appeared a lot on mainstream media and were not allowed on after a certain point, or not invited back.
Well, I can think of two examples right now. Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger. I mean, two guys
they're both left to center.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Schellenberger made his entire career reporting on, as an environmentalist, reporting on and writing about renewable energy and the homelessness crisis in California. Like, a very self-described progressive liberal man who now, he made the mistake of being associated with Elon Musk, another noted former self-described Democrat. Like,
he used to be a shining star of the left. Musk was held up, and he was mentioned, he was interviewed a lot, and now he's described as right wing, regardless of they actually. This label gets thrown around regardless of any due diligence of actually checking if their views have shifted.
That's right.
It's just a slur that's used.
How big of a shift? Sorry to interrupt. How big of a shift? Speaking of podcasts, has Joe Rogan taken in the last 2-3 years? Joe Rogan has always been a self-described liberal person, supportive of the welfare state, of a Bernie bro. He was one of the original Bernie bros, right? This is a guy who talks regularly about being growing up on food stamps and the importance of social programs, and how Obama is his favorite president, he views as the most presidential president we've ever had. Like, literally nothing about this guy is conservative in his life, other than, I don't know, people associate now. I was watching an Twitter X video the other day about how people associate health and fitness with the right wing now. So I don't know. I guess
if you're really interested in working out and weights, then you're following some conspiracy theories as well.
Right.
So
conspiracy theories about body mass index.
Yeah. So
I don't know, man.
It's kind of sad to see the Overton window, the acceptable discourse, be narrowed and narrowed. And this is where, I guess that's been the most interesting and also kind of frustrating and kind of draining this last month, is seeing we've lost nuance along the way, and the Palestine-Israel conflict has people divided again. And what I'm worried, every time people are divided, I'm worried about some of these bigger issues. It's like people are so focused on these things, and we're not seeing kind of creeping authoritarian policies. We're not seeing digital IDs or these health passes or these things that erode away at the individual sovereignty of countries and the sovereignty of citizens within those countries. And people are so focused on these other things and like, well, this is important, but there's still some of these bigger issues out on there, and we're so distracted at the moment.
Yeah, it's a very old authoritarian technique, political technique, where a divided population is much easier to control. That's just history teaches us that over and over again. So yeah, like when to kind of refer to what we were talking about earlier, there was a brief moment a couple months ago where you saw people of all faiths uniting behind a cause regarding children, and it was very nice. It was lovely to see that, where you could have two people protesting against the same thing, who you would, if you were a person who subscribed to certain stereotypes, you would point them out individually and say that person probably hates that person, but they didn't, and they were actually very much in agreement with each other on a very important issue regarding a very important subset of the population, and a very vulnerable population. And now that's all gone. Any of that goodwill that was built up over those few weeks seems to have completely gone away, from what I can see.
Yeah, it's people have kind of forgot about that the momentum that you had there, that unification, that kind of got sussed out. It's also kind of a situation right now that both Israel and Palestine can justify violence against each other internally. That's all they need is internal support from their citizens, and they have to believe in their reasons, but they can both justify violence. And it's hard to say, like, you may have an outcome where every atrocity done on either side fuels further advancements, and then, well, like, it's going to entrench the hatred over time, and each side will point to an atrocity, and then I guess if the belief structure is, well, we cannot compromise, or if over time, like, if people say, no, we cannot have a two-state solution, there's no way for peace, then both sides are going to go balls to the wall. And then if one side has more might, then you're going to see some civilians being caught in the crossfire, and that's going to fuel more hatred from the groups affected by that. So it's not ideal at all.
We've seen. No, and it's what they have been doing since the 40s and the 50s. And also 2,000 years before that. So you have you mentioned it earlier. I mean, you have two groups of people, both with legitimate claims to a piece of land. But it's more than that. It's like, it's a divine claim to the, to the land. So it's not as if it's not as if you can point to a period of time and say, well, no, you see, on this date and this period of history, this sale was completed, which transferred this piece of, like, you can't do that, because both sides believe that their individual God ordained them to live on that land. What do you do with that? What do you do with that in an era where things are negotiated with contracts and money? Like, there is no way to settle this. There is no way to settle a divine score with, well, as we can see, with any sort of politics or negotiations or even treaties, which have been signed and rejected and re-signed and rewritten, and no one can seem to agree on it, because you do have a situation where, listen, I'll give just a very quick backstory here, just to take us home here, but coming from an Arab family, a Lebanese family, I was just raised with we didn't talk about it too much, but when the topic did come up, it was just presumed that, well, of course, the Palestinians, that's their land, they're being occupied by Israel, and the Zionists are bulldozing their homes and stealing their land. My family at least did not go as far as to, just blame Jews in general, but more the Zionist movement. So that's sort of what I grew up just assuming to be the case. But the more I've thought about it, the more, while I still recognize that, of course, it would be horrible to live in a world where you are not sure if the land that you're living on is going to be settled by somebody who you view as a mortal enemy at any given time, of course. I didn't know prior to this conflict that Gaza actually hadn't been occupied since 2005. I didn't know that. I hadn't considered everyone knows that Israel is very heavily supported militarily by the US and by other Western nations, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they are a nuclear power. So
yeah, there's a mismatch between the military strength of Gaza and the IDF right now.
That's right. And so, when you talk about somebody bringing a gun to a knife fight or a knife to a gunfight, well, in this case, it's bringing like homemade pipe bombs to a nuke fight. So you have a situation where we have people in Canada who vaguely associated, however they are, with the protests, saying that we need to stop the Palestinian genocide. Well, how does that work, though, when one country for at least the last 40 years, 30 years maybe, has, if they wanted to, at any given moment, they could actually genocide all Palestinians. They could, overnight they could, but they don't. And then you have the military government of Gaza, in their written constitution, their stated goal, one of their stated goals, is to literally hunt down and kill every Jew on the planet. I don't know how you square those. Like, who would perpetuate the genocide if they could, and who has the ability to and isn't? To me, that pretty much settles who, if you had to pick a side, if you had to pick a good guy and a bad guy, that seems pretty cut and dry to me.
Yeah, it's you look at their text, you look at their laws, you look at what they explicitly state, and there is a difference there. My worry with this, my prediction is that further conflict happens, the Gaza gets kind of swallowed up by Israel, and conflict happens, and you got to bring peace. The world stage says, like, we got to bring peace to this somehow, but they're like, well, Israel, maybe we let them occupy that, and maybe you get more resentment and you get further conflicts down the road as you get other countries being like, well, we didn't like how you treated. Like, it's just a cycle that goes on. So whatever small win or loss like may happen right now, people's lives are at stake, but at the same time, you've got these greater feuds being fueled.
Yeah, and with no real winner, and with at every step of the situation that you describe, more and more innocent lives get lost.
Yeah,
just by necessity. None of that can happen without that as a byproduct.
Yeah, and you still run into the issue of conversations on like, well, there's colonization happening right now, but that language is used in these cases. But when there's hordes of migration happening to countries, well, look at Sweden, who's had, you look at the average Swede and tell me their demographic, and they've had an open borders policy, almost like a huge open border policy, fairly unrestricted, and those are still considered migrants in that way. And are all those people adopting their, are they adopting all of the ideals and the values in Sweden, or are they like, what rate of migration, using that term, is sustainable? How much, anytime you've got, like, we have this idea of this rosy, multicultural kind of utopian idea of the world. But you still run into issues where you have people and there's either language barrier, culture barrier, and value, like differences of values and beliefs. And values and beliefs will inform actions. You will get at odds with people as well. So my bigger worry around this is that conflicts like this ignite local conflicts. And I'm really hoping that conversations can be having, like, we can at home in our Western countries, people can still have open dialogues, because when you start to tribalize, and Canada's a mixing pot, and what happens when you get different tribes of people with different divine ideas going at each other's throats for perceived harm in other places. Your perfect utopian society, your melting pot, could turn into a mess if we lose these ideas of open dialogue, trying to empathize and understand each other's positions. Like that's our saving grace, is how do we communicate with each other? So we need that, or we're gonna,
the melting pot, if you will, could boil over.
Literally boil over. Yes. That's a great analogy. Yeah.
And I think that's a good place to end. What do you think?
I think that's a good place to end as well. We've covered a few things. We'll link these in the show notes, and I'm excited to dive in again for another episode.
Oh yeah, I'm sure lots of topics that we touched on here will come up again. So thank you very much, sir. Great chat, and thanks for listening, everyone. We will we'll have links and videos for you to watch to further your to further guide you, as we do on the Critical Compass, to primary and secondary sources outside of just two bums in their home recording studios. So thanks so much, and we'll see you again.
Take care.